My nephew called 3 days before Christmas and asked if I could feed his cat while everyone was at the cabin. I laughed, thinking he meant his parents. Then he started naming names: Grandpa, Uncle Marcus, the cousins, everyone except me. He went quiet and asked, "Wait, why aren't you coming?" I had no answer. When I finally asked my father, he didn't pretend it was an oversight. We wanted one Christmas without the tension you bring. So I stayed away. By Christmas morning, they understood exactly what that meant. Stick around, because a 12-year-old's innocent question changed how I saw my entire family. It was December 22nd, and I was finishing the last of my work before the holiday break. The non-profit I managed had technically closed at noon, but I stayed anyway, half a grant calendar open on one screen, a box of decorations I kept meaning to take home sitting by my chair. My phone lit up with my nephew Caleb's name. He was 12, and he called me directly for things that only mattered if you were 12. Whether his cat, Biscuit, understood birthdays, whether purple was a weird color for a bike helmet. That afternoon it was Biscuit. His parents were leaving for the cabin, and he wanted to make sure I had the feeding schedule exactly right. I agreed before he even finished explaining. My sister Nicole lived 20 minutes away, and I had nowhere else to be. Then, almost as an afterthought, Caleb mentioned how excited he was. I asked when they were leaving. "The 23rd, he said. Grandpa wanted everyone there before dinner. My hand froze over the keyboard. For a second, I assumed he meant his father's side. Then he kept talking. Uncle Marcus was bringing board games. Aunt Priya had promised hot chocolate. The cousins had already claimed the bunk beds. The names collected in my head until there was nowhere left for misunderstanding to hide. My father, my brother Marcus, his wife, their boys, my sister Nicole, her husband, Caleb, everyone. I looked at my calendar. Christmas Day sat there, circled, open the way it always was. Nobody had asked if I was free, because nobody normally had to. For years, Christmas had been a default, not an invitation. Caleb's voice lost its excitement. "Wait, why aren't you coming with everyone?" The question was so simple, it hurt more than an accusation would have. I told him I must have missed part of the planning and steered us back to the cat. He relaxed instantly. By the time we hung up, I knew everything about Biscuit's routine and nothing about why my family was spending Christmas without me. I called my sister first because I still wanted the answer to be boring. Nicole was packing. When I mentioned the cabin, the sound of drawers stopped. She hadn't expected me to know. She said carefully that she thought I had other plans, that Dad had told them I needed space after Thanksgiving and had already made my own arrangements. I pressed my thumb into the edge of my desk. I had never told my father I needed space. I had never told him I had plans. There was only one person left who could explain it. I called my father. He answered on the third ring, calm, untouched by the fact that I'd just discovered I was the only one missing from Christmas. I asked him directly whether I'd actually been invited. He didn't rush to deny it. "I think we need to talk about why you weren't invited," he said, gently, like he was discussing a dinner reservation. He said Thanksgiving had left everyone exhausted, that he wanted one holiday without another argument. Then the sentence that would follow me for days. "We wanted one Christmas without the tension you bring." If he'd shouted, I could have shouted back. Instead, he made exclusion sound like common sense. Not a punishment, but a favor to everyone else. He said people were tired of walking on eggshells around me. Not him, people. Everyone, the family, speaking through him, apparently unable to speak for themselves. He brought up Thanksgiving, when my father had mocked my 16-year-old nephew Owen for quitting football, and I'd stepped in hard, publicly, before my brother Marcus could say a word. In my father's version, I'd humiliated Marcus in front of his own son. Some of that I could dismiss, but some of it landed, because Marcus himself had told me afterward, quietly, that he could handle his own son. My sister had said something similar. I had always called it protecting the people I loved. For the first time, I wondered how often it had actually looked like taking over. I told my father I understood. I wouldn't come to the cabin, wouldn't call my siblings demanding explanations, wouldn't make Caleb feel guilty for telling me the truth. The only thing I'd keep was my promise to feed the cat. He dismissed that with a small sound, like it had nothing to do with anything. I hung up before he could turn my composure into a lecture. That night, alone in my apartment, his sentence kept circling back. Sometimes people can handle their own problems without you. I could hate him for lying about my plans and still admit that particular accusation had found real ground. At Thanksgiving, I had moved faster than anyone else in the room, absorbing the blow so no one else had to decide how to respond. It had always felt like helping. Sitting alone with an untouched glass of water, I wondered, for the first time, how often it had actually been me taking the room away from the people I meant to protect. The next morning, my empty calendar looked less like a stand I was taking and more like a hole. I hadn't planned anything, hadn't bought groceries for one, hadn't told anyone why. My friend Renata called about something unrelated and heard it in my voice before I said a word. When I told her, the cabin, my father, all of it, she didn't call him a monster or tell me to drive up anyway. She asked what I was doing Christmas Eve. "Small dinner," she said. "Room for one more." My first instinct was to offer to bring something, help set up, make myself useful. She cut me off. "Bring yourself. That's the whole assignment." I laughed, because it sounded ridiculous. Then I stopped laughing, because I realized I didn't know how to do that. My sister came by before they left, dropping off the spare key and a note from Caleb about the cat, complete with a crooked drawing and 3 underlined words. "Sit with him, please." She apologized in the careful way people do when they know they've contributed to something but haven't decided how much to own. I asked if Caleb was excited. She said he was. That was easier for both of us than talking about our father. That evening, the family drove north without me. No one called. No one turned around. I fed the cat, sat with him exactly as instructed, and drove home to a silence that felt, against my will, like proof my father might be right. Christmas Eve, I went to Renata's. Her house was warm and mismatched and loud in the ordinary way. Someone complaining a dish was too salty and eating a second helping anyway. 2 people disagreeing about music and working it out themselves. Nobody watched the room the way I always had. Nobody needed managing. For the first 20 minutes, I didn't know what to do with my hands. Then something in me started to loosen. My phone rang around 9, my sister's name. My stomach dropped. Caleb, an accident, something real. But her voice wasn't panicked, just exhausted, with raised voices behind her. Caleb was fine, she said first, and the relief nearly buckled me. Then she told me the rest. Our father had spent the day criticizing Caleb, then turned on Nicole when she pushed back, accusing her of making everything into an insult, bringing tension into everything, my label, now hers. She asked me to call him, and I felt the old machinery start up automatically, already rebuilding a room I wasn't in, already drafting exactly what to say to get him to back down. I made myself stop. I asked if anyone was unsafe. "No," she said, "just miserable." I told her I loved her, that I was sorry the night had turned ugly, and then the hardest sentence I've ever said. "You wanted to handle Christmas without me. You can handle Dad without me too." The silence that followed wasn't anger, it was shock. Renata found me afterward in the hallway and asked only if anyone was in danger. When I said no, she said adults were allowed to have hard conversations without outsourcing them to whoever was best at absorbing the damage. I went back inside and let the party keep going without my hands in it. Just after 10, my brother Marcus called, quieter than I'd ever heard him. He asked one question. Had I chosen not to come? I told him the truth. I actually owned. My father had said, to my face, that the family wanted a Christmas without the tension I brought. I had never asked for space. I had never had other plans. I let the silence sit, instead of filling it for him. He admitted he'd believed the easier story, because it fit what he already thought about Thanksgiving. Then he said only, "Okay, I needed to know," and hung up to go back inside. I woke before sunrise on Christmas morning and drove straight to my sister's to feed Biscuit, determined not to spend the day imagining outcomes I couldn't verify. Her house should have been dark. It wasn't. Her husband's car was in the driveway. Through the window, suitcases sat against the wall. Inside, the cat wove around my ankles like nothing had happened. My sister sat at the table, hands around a mug she wasn't drinking from, looking ashamed rather than angry. She told me what happened after I refused to call him. The argument hadn't ended, only shifted. My father kept insisting everyone was overreacting. Marcus had gone back in and asked, out loud, in front of everyone, why Dad had told them all I'd chosen not to come. My father tried to recast the lie as a simplification. But for once, I wasn't there to argue with him, so the room had nowhere else to look but at the truth. My sister told him he'd spent the day correcting her son and then calling her too sensitive for saying so. Marcus admitted he'd been angry at me at Thanksgiving, but that he'd also let our father's fury land on me instead of standing between him and his own son. My sister packed the car and left after midnight. Marcus and his family stopped at a hotel rather than drive through the night. My father stayed at the cabin. Alone, he'd wanted quiet. He got more of it than he intended. She looked at me and said the sentence that mattered most. We didn't stop loving him. We just stopped letting you be the reason. We never said any of this to him. Grief and relief sat side by side in me, heavier than I expected. Then my phone rang. My father's name on the screen. He wasn't shouting. That made it worse. He said everyone had overreacted over a few comments nobody would remember in a week. Then he circled toward blame, the way he always did. How convenient that I'd stayed away and still ended up at the center of it. He said I'd gotten what I wanted. I didn't argue his version point by point. I told him the only facts that mattered. I hadn't told anyone to leave, hadn't called first, had done exactly what he asked. I'd stayed away. The silence that followed sounded like a man who'd reached the edge of his own excuse. You knew what would happen without you, he said. For years, I'd behaved as if that were true, as if my stepping in was the only thing holding the family together. No, Dad, I said. I spent years making sure none of us ever found out. When he asked what I expected everyone to do now, I recognized the old opening, the one where I'd start rebuilding the peace for him. I told him instead that I didn't know, because I wasn't going to decide for them anymore. If he wanted things right with Nicole, he needed to talk to Nicole. The same for Marcus. I would be his daughter. I would not be his translator. Nothing fixed itself overnight. My father never delivered a clean apology. But the small habits changed. My sister stopped calling me after hard conversations with him to ask what to say next. She still told me things, but she stopped asking me to fix them. Marcus started answering our father directly instead of waiting for me to step between them. Weeks later, my sister hosted a cautious Sunday lunch, our father included. I almost arrived early out of old habit, then caught myself and came exactly on time. The house was loud and normal, Caleb showing his cousin something on a tablet, Marcus mangling a loaf of bread. Near the end of the meal, my father made a mild comment about Owen's schedule, needling at Marcus the same old way. I felt the reflex rise in me instantly, the sentence already forming to redirect him before it could grow. I didn't say it. Marcus set down his fork and told our father, calmly, that the decision belonged to him and his son. No lecture, no fight. My father looked displeased, but the disagreement stayed exactly where it belonged, between the two of them. Nobody looked to me to fix it. Nobody needed to. My father had wanted one Christmas without the tension I supposedly brought. What he got, in the end, was a family that finally learned to speak for itself. And one Christmas without the daughter who'd spent years quietly carrying everyone else's silence for them. I never picked that weight up again.